Thank you very much, Abraham, for that very comprehensive and quite challenging presentation. The scope of what you presented gives us quite a bit to digest. I think what was quite striking about it is the challenge that UNHCR faces in response to the pressures that it faces from state actors, a number of actors, the way that states have been responding and the expectations of states of what it might task UNHCR to do, and how UNHCR is able to find a space within these challenges in the way that it lays out, for example, the 10-point plan of action. I particularly appreciate what you mentioned about the role of researchers in responding to this. Not only researchers, but civil society more generally. You described that researchers have the luxury to engage with this area of work. You also mentioned the luxury of resources that we have in Canada. I'd call it a relative luxury of resources that we have in Canada. But I think more generally there's a strong sense not only of luxury but also of responsibility to take the resources that we have to engage with these kinds of questions in a way that furthers the debate, not simply for the benefit of discourse and rhetoric. I'm sure you can appreciate that the types of challenges that you laid out in your presentation are an area of significant concern for the research community, but certainly for individuals in the research community who work quite passionately to try and address the types of issues that you laid out, but also to challenge some of the labels that are used in these discussions, and ensuring that in discussions about irregularity or illegality, some terms that are quite jarring for us, that the needs of the individuals present in these discussions are not forgotten. I know that there are a number of researchers in this room who work quite passionately in this area, and Abraham has been kind enough to leave us time for discussion and response. And I know that there are certainly comments and responses to what was said and questions as well. So I'd like to open the floor if there are any questions or comments for Abraham, please.
Yes, Mary, please.
Yes, I'm Mary Quickly from the CCR. And I just wanted to go back to your beginning definition of a refugee and your statement that there are no economic refugees. And I understand where that's coming from. I think of the people that I have worked with in Thailand, where you have about, as I'm sure you know, about 150,000 people with some sort of recognition by the Thai government as refugees from Burma, and then another 1.5 million, or perhaps 2 million, no one knows for sure, so-called illegal migrants. And as soon as you start analyzing root causes and really try to give some depth to that word persecution, one begins to realize very quickly that 1.5 million people who've left Burma have left for very complex reasons, and that persecution has both a political and an economic dimension in a very deliberate way. I mean, not just by accident, that politically repressed people tend to be economically depressed, but that in fact there are state policies in Burma that use economics as a form of persecution. And in a situation like that, and I suspect there are quite a few others in the world like that as well, then the line blurs between economic and political persecution and refugee and migrants. And I just wonder how that kind of situation fits into your framework.
I think you're absolutely right in the way you look at it. It's clear that people move for various reasons. And it's also possible that you do maybe for economic reasons, and who might or may eventually be seen as being a refugee. But what I was referring to was basically the definition of a refugee. The definition of refugee as conceived in the 1951 Convention for was actually relating to persecutory treatment, fear of persecution, fleeing a country of origin for fear of persecution, escaping its borders to seek asylum elsewhere, to seek safety elsewhere. And as I said, the term economic refugee is not something that I personally subscribe to. People move for all sorts of reasons. Today we have people moving for reasons of climatic change, degradation of the environment, but we've not given that term, that definition legally. This has not been defined in my opinion, and that's where I was trying to make the distinction. But the reasons for departure of a flight could be multiple.
What constitutes persecution in that context?
Persecution in today's context has evolved over the years. In the days gone by, we would refer to persecution by states, but subsequent executive committee conclusions have also recognized that there is persecution by non-state actors, as we also see in some parts of this region. So that's also gives them room to claim refugee status insofar as they are fleeing a non-state actor.
And just to follow up on that, I think the point is, though, can there be a point where the regime, the junta in Myanmar, in Burma, enacts policies against Karen, Karenni, Rohingya, Chin, what have you, that are of such a scale that it constitutes persecution, which forces to flee? Its manifestation may be economic, but is a state policy which can constitute persecution. Is that more sort of...
I think so. I think forced labor or fear of forced labor, that kind of thing for sure, might be an example. But it's interesting that if you were to interview some of these people, they would say they fled because they can get a better life in Thailand. And yet when you deconstruct why it is they can get a better life in Thailand, it looks a lot like persecution. So it's a bit complex.
And I think the case of Thailand makes a very interesting point, that where you have multiple different groups who, for political reasons, have been disaggregated into those in the camps, those not in the camps, the Shan, and what have you, that actually one of the important roles of research is to emphasize the commonalities, the differences, to get beyond the rhetoric of the way that we label these different groups and understand what the motivations are at their root.